I rise today to speak to Bill S-228, an Act to amend the Constitution Act 1867, Property Qualifications of Senators. I vividly remember the day 3 years ago that I got that message from Ottawa asking me to provide proof that I was qualified to be a senator, that I owned $4,000 worth of real property. As it happens, I was on holiday outside the country, and I had to scramble to pull together all the necessary documentation to prove that I owned my house. I needed to provide a land title certificate from the Alberta Land Titles Office. I needed to provide a property tax assessment from the City of Edmonton. I needed a copy of my mortgage agreement with my bank and a copy of my Alberta driver's license to prove that my official legal address matched the address on all those other documents, all to prove that I actually lived in the house that I owned. Now, I was lucky. I did indeed own the little house where I lived. But while my lawyer and I hustled around to round up all the necessary documentation as quickly as possible, I wondered, why exactly was a $4,000 property requirement still a thing? Since I speak to a lot of school groups about the Senate, and they often ask me the same question, I set out to find an answer. So here's some of what I tell the students when they ask me. To understand the origin of the property qualification, it's necessary to understand just how tumultuous a time the 60s actually were, and I don't mean the 1960s, I mean the 1860s. It was a decade of seismic shifts in political power, a decade that saw the Russian Empire free its serfs and the United States abolish slavery, a decade when Mexico threw off its French military imperial oppressors and executed its French Emperor Maximilian I, a decade when Spain deposed its Queen Isabella in its glorious revolution, a decade where Italy became a free and united nation thanks to the revolutionary leadership of Giuseppe Garibaldi. 1867 was the year Karl Marx published Das Kapital. It was the year of the Fenian Uprising in Ireland, and it was the year the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli signed the Second Reform Act, which enfranchised 1 million new British voters, including thousands of urban working men, effectively doubling the number of British men who had the right to vote. And it was against that backdrop that the British North America Act was written and that Canada became a country, which is essential to understanding why we have a Senate in the first place, and why one of the key qualifications to be a senator was that you owned a significant amount of land. Now, $4,000 isn't a lot of money now, but back then it was roughly the equivalent of owning $1 million worth of property. In a time of social upheaval and worldwide worker revolts, in a time when elites were rightly nervous about their futures, it's no wonder the architects of Canada's Confederation were keen to set up a form of government that would protect the interests of the landed and the wealthy. Canada, after all, could have had a unicameral system of government, as our provinces do, with only a single House of Commons. Instead, the powers that be opted for a bicameral system, with an upper chamber modeled on the British House of Lords, which safeguarded the rights of the hereditary landed gentry. Except, of course, the 4 Canadian colonies that made up that embryo Canada didn't have dukes or barons or earls. We had no hereditary nobility here at all, except a few odd remittance men. Since we couldn't have a House of Lords, it was decided we should have a Senate, an upper body named for the Senate of ancient Rome. Who would our senators be? Well, the Latin root for Senate is senex, meaning old man. So our senators would be older men. Senators in ancient Rome were appointed, not elected. They were also supposed to be men of outstanding character, imbued with the Roman civil virtues. They were meant to be men of gravitas, dignitas, humanitas. In the days of the Roman Republic, they also had to be rich, or at least independently wealthy, since Roman senators served unpaid. But it was the first Roman emperor, Augustus, who added a property qualification. Augustus decreed that no man could sit in the Senate unless he owned property worth 1,200,000 sesterces. It's probably foolish to try to translate that into contemporary currency, but some who have tried, nonetheless, translate 1 million sesterces into roughly $1 million. Though I'd take that with a grain of salt, a fitting expression since the words salary and salt come from the same Latin root. But to return to 1867, it's fair to say that the original architects of our bicameral parliament expressly intended our Senate to mirror its Roman namesake, to the extent that appointed Canadian senators would represent the interests of the wealthy and the landed. And sure enough, when the first 72 senators were called to sit in Canada's first parliament, they were a collection of wealthy seigneurs and shipping barons, bankers and gentlemen farmers, men of wealth and property. To judge by their photos, you might well assume that ownership of an enormous pair of side whiskers or a giant moustache was also a requirement for the job, a more ornate collection of Victorian facial fuzz you could never hope to see. But my friends, it is not 1867 anymore. Victoria isn't on the throne, and neither is the Emperor Augustus. And our Constitution is a living tree, capable of growth and expansion within its natural limits. It is in a continuous process of evolution. That's what Lord Sankey, the British Lord Chancellor, wrote in 1929 when he ruled in the Persons case that Canadian women were entitled to sit in the Canadian Senate. It was a radical change to the qualification rules, and it was 5 formidable, flawed, unyielding Alberta women, Henrietta Muir Edwards, Louise McKinney, Irene Parlby, Nellie McClung, and Emily Murphy, who fought that fight and forever changed the makeup of the Senate. The first woman, Kyrene Wilson, was appointed to our Senate in 1930, and while it took a long, long time, we are now at effective gender parity in this chamber. So yes, there is indeed precedent to change the qualifications to sit in the Senate. And in 2022, it is anachronistic, bordering on offensive, to think of this chamber as a defender of the rights of rich property owners. Senator Patterson has already done an excellent job of outlining the ways the property ownership provisions discriminate against the residents of Nunavut, where much land is held in common, and against people who live on First Nations reserves or in Métis settlements. In 2022, when anyone can apply to be a senator, it should surely be unconscionable to have a system designed to discriminate against Indigenous peoples in this way. But it's not only First Nations, Métis, and Inuit Canadians who may be precluded from applying to be senators under the current rules. Given the stratospheric property prices in Vancouver and Toronto, property ownership in some of Canada's largest cities may soon be out of the reach of a generation. If we become a society where even the most accomplished urbanites are primarily renters, not owners, we could disqualify all kinds of talented Canadians from Senate service. Let me quote the words of a truly great senator from Edmonton, the delightful Tommy Banks of blessed memory. This is from a speech he gave to this Senate on this issue in January of 2009. Quote, "There was perhaps an apocryphal story that one senator-to-be sought to qualify by having bought a cemetery plot, which was seen as not being entirely in order," Banks joked. Then he added, "There have been instances in the past in which persons considering appointment to the Senate have actually bought a garage of someone else. That is a fact. This is a preposterous requirement. It is antediluvian, and it has no place in the requirements for being named to this place in the 21st century." To which I say, hear, hear. Cela dit, l'adoption de l'amendement du sénateur Patterson ne sera pas une tâche simple. Oui, la Cour suprême a statué en 2014 qu'un tel amendement peut être fait uniquement par le Parlement sans l'accord des provinces. Mais il est également à noter que le Québec est dans une situation peculière. La seule province où les sénateurs sont affectés à certaines régions de la province et sont tenus de posséder des biens sans ces divisions. Selon le raisonnement de la Cour suprême, nous ne pouvons pas vraiment faire cela tant que le gouvernement du Québec n'est pas d'accord. En vérité, je ne vois vraiment aucune raison pour le Québec s'y oppose, étant donné que les clauses sont tellement archaïques qu'elles n'incluent même pas la moitié nord de la province. Mais je ne peux pas parler pour le Québec, évidemment, et c'est jusqu'à ce que le Québec soit consulté et accepte. Je pense qu'il sera difficile pour nous d'aller de l'avant. That said, I want to thank Senator Patterson for continuing the work of my Edmonton predecessor, Senator Banks. It is time to find a way to extinguish a property requirement which could certainly be seen as classist, if not racist, and to ensure that no otherwise qualified candidate is prevented from applying for a position in the Senate simply because they aren't landed. And if we are worried that we are breaking with tradition and disrespecting our history, well, let me quote the words of another Roman emperor, the Emperor Claudius. In AD 48, Claudius shocked the Roman Senate by deciding to appoint senators from Gaul, what is today the territory we call France. Many senators were appalled at the idea of appointing these French barbarians from the provinces into the Senate of Rome. According to the Annals of Tacitus, the emperor had this response to these Roman hidebound folks. Said the emperor, "Everything, senators, which we now credit as ancient and established, was once new. Plebeian magistrates followed patricians. Magistrates from Latium followed plebeians. Magistrates from all the other races of Italy after the Latins. This thing, too, will become the custom, and what today we defend by means of precedents will be a precedent itself." Chers collègues, if our namesake institution could adapt with the times and allow into the Senate new and worthy members who didn't meet the old-fashioned qualifications, well, I think we should be able to do the same. When in Rome, as they say, do as the Romans. Thank you. Merci, hi hi, and gratias.
Senator Deakin, Ontario, did you have a question?
Yes. Will my honored senator take a question?
Go ahead, Senator Deakin.
Thank you, and thank you for that history and entertaining aspect of the history. I think it's really important to know around this bill. My question for you is, you did do a thorough historical perspective right up into the work of Senator Banks. And so I wonder, as you've been doing this work, beyond the issues around that you described well around Quebec and the will to make a change, are there any other barriers or things that you learned along the way that could stop us from moving forward on this, given the issues you just described at the end of your speech? Is there anything else in the way?
Senator Simons.
Well, I think there is a consideration, because I think it is important that we live in the provinces that we represent. And I spoke to one constitutional law professor, Eric Adams, who's the vice dean at the law school at the University of Alberta. And I said to him, should I be concerned that if we eliminate the property requirement, it might make it easier for people not to live where they say that they do? And he said to me, does the property requirement actually make them live where they say that they do? And I had to say, no, it didn't. He said, well, then if it's not actually a safeguard now, getting rid of it won't functionally make any difference. As far as the other constitutional questions, I've been pretending to know something about the law these last couple of speeches, but this place is filled with actual constitutional law experts who could answer that question better than I.
Dalphon.
And that's one of them.
Sorry. Merci beaucoup, sénatrice Simons, pour ce discours très intéressant et historique. Vous avez suggéré qu'on attende que la situation au Québec soit corrigée, mais peut-être qu'une solution pourrait être d'avoir dans la loi, un projet de loi qui est proposé par le sénateur Patterson, une clause à la fin qui dit que la loi ne prendra, l'amendement constitutionnel qui est prévu par la loi, ne prendra effet que lorsque le Québec aura adopté une motion similaire pour les sénateurs québécois. Et là, ça permettrait de mettre en place ce système, et dès que le Québec dit oui, on pourrait terminer le changement.
Simons.
Même, c'est peut-être une bonne idée, je pense, mais c'est pour sénateur Patterson, ou peut-être si vous avez un amendement, peut-être.